Alright, what is going on YouTube? Run and Gun Sports back here with another video. Today is our weekly college football news update. We just updated our Bengals offseason review and our weekly NFL news video. So if you have not checked any of those videos out, go check those out, leave them a like, and obviously please leave this video a like if you did enjoy it. And we are going to be talking about a decent amount of recruiting news in the college football world happening this week, and three spring games that have happened. The Florida State Seminoles had their spring game this weekend. The Alabama Crimson Tide, defending national champions, had their spring game this past weekend. And also the Georgia Bulldogs, who have been very hyped coming out of this preseason. And so if you have not already, subscribe, leave a like on this video or any other video that you watch. Follow our social media pages at @runandgun_sports on Instagram and at @runandgunsports on TikTok. And with that being said, let's get right into the video. Four-star cornerback DeHay McCullough commits to Indiana. It is Indiana's highest rated recruit ever, and his dad is the assistant head coach at Indiana and the running backs coach. So Indiana doing good things, and I think it'll be interesting to see what Indiana can do this next season with Michael Penix Jr. coming back after the injury. They had a pretty good season last year, gave Ohio State a great game, and so we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, obviously the injury I just mentioned for Michael Penix Jr. tore his ACL, but in the games he played in, he was a very strong player, and they had a great year with him at quarterback, and I can't wait to see what they'll do in the Big Ten next year. Number one class of 2022 tight end and four-star Jake Johnson commits to LSU. Ed Orgeron is trying to get back to competing for a national title, and adding the number one tight end in the country is a very good move to help you get there. Four-star dual-threat quarterback Braden Davis announces his top 7 schools: South Carolina, West Virginia, NC State, Georgia Tech, Duke, Stanford, and Cincinnati. Five-star defensive end Omari Arbor out of Duncanville High School in Dallas, Texas, announces his top 10 schools: Alabama, USC, Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, LSU, Arizona State, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and Texas. And Duncanville High School in the Dallas area is it's a powerhouse. They've produced some huge big-time players that are going to be upcoming in the college football world, and they're a great team, well coached, and Texas just produces great high school talents like nobody else, and they're like the matter day of Texas. They're just a powerhouse, and they're good every single year, and it's gonna be exciting to see where Omari Arbor ends up. The defensive end position right now is really one of the more highly coveted positions in college football recruiting, with JT Tolomalu coming out of Eastside Catholic in Sammamish, Washington, and then you have Corey Foreman from Sentinel High School in California, in the Southern California area. Those guys on 2 different recruiting programs, 24/7 Sports and Rivals.com. Those guys are both number one on each other's websites. Recruiting 24/7 Sports has JT Tolomalu as the number one player in the country. Rivals has Corey Foreman as the number one player on the country in their list, and obviously whoever's not at 1 is at 2. So it's just a very highly coveted position right now at the high school level, and so we'll see how Omari Arbor, where he lands up. Five-star offensive tackle Cam Dewberry announces his top 5 schools: Alabama, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Texas, and Ohio State. Offensive tackle and 4-star Keontae Gooden has committed to the University of Kentucky. It is Kentucky's 3rd highest commit of all time, so good move for Mike Stoops. And some struggling years for him, but he's still recruiting fairly well, and I just think the culture at Kentucky is very good. They've been consistent, but they haven't been consistently good. They've been consistently mediocre, and getting good commits like Keontae Goodwin is a very good move to try and make them become a consistently good team. 4-star wide receiver Tyler Morse commits to Michigan. So that is going to wrap it up for the recruiting portion of this video. Now we are going to be going into our spring game coverage. We're going to be starting off with the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State hired head coach Mike Norvell last season. It was his first year last year obviously had a very struggling season. They only won 3 games, but they did win one of those games versus North Carolina, who's a ranked team at the time, a huge upset. And so they really weren't able to build off that win, unfortunately. But the transfer class that Florida State holds is honestly insane. Mackenzie Milton, we've talked about him before, suffered a brutal injury while at UCF and has transferred to Florida State, and it's be great to see what he does. DJ Williams, a running back, is a sophomore out of Auburn. Jermaine Johnson, the senior defensive end from Georgia. He's bounced around at a couple of schools. He was on the Netflix TV show Last Chance U. He's the #1 JUCO player in his class, then went to Georgia, and then now at Florida State, obviously. And he was very good at Georgia, had a great year. Kier Thomas, defensive end from South Carolina, another senior defensive end, and then 3 defensive backs, all from the southeastern region of the country. Jarquez McLaren, defensive back, junior from Arkansas. Brandon Moore, senior defensive back from UCF. And Jamie Robinson from South Carolina. He's only a sophomore. And Caleb Blake, also a defensive back from Colorado State. So they have a stacked and very experienced defensive backfield for Florida State. And I really noticed that Florida State, they had a very great depth at wide receiver. A lot of the guys can make good run after catch plays, and it's just really exciting for Mackenzie Milton to get the ball out to those guys, and it's going to help them a ton. But the O-line was really a struggle, and it's not going to help, and you don't want Mackenzie Milton to possibly get injured again. And if that does happen, it's going to be devastating for the team. But really, I think that the O-line would be a big reason to holding that team back. Mackenzie Milton, I know it was a spring game, but they really didn't give him as much time as I'd like to see. But he looked great out there. It didn't look like he hadn't played football in over 3 years. He looked like he picked up right where he left off, which is very impressive considering the type of injury he had taken was so severe, and the fact that he's playing at such a high level still, and his ball placement was great, and he was very mobile out of the pocket, making throws on the run. I was very impressed with him. Jordan Travis was the backup quarterback for Mackenzie Milton, second stringer. He was very mobile as well, and so I thought that he looked very good, and so good depth at the quarterback position. The secondary was very hard hitting. They did very well, and they hit hard, but their coverage, there was a big lack of coverage in the game, and so they need to improve on that. In my opinion, it just didn't look very good. The passing game was very efficient. As I said, if you're having Mackenzie Milton, he'll dink and dime it down the field, he'll throw deep. The pass game was there. It was very efficient, but they had no run game at all, which might be a concern, and it's hard to have a run game with no line, and so just really unfortunate for the Florida State Seminoles. They need to improve the offensive line as soon as possible, and hopefully by the beginning of the season, because they can't be multi or single dimensional team. Moving on now to the Alabama spring game. Great depth at running back is one of the first things, and Brian Robinson unfortunately unable to go, but he had a lot of guys filling in for his spot, and so I think that it's not going to be a problem for the Alabama Crimson Tide team to have guys out if there is an injury, but you don't hope injuries at all. Trey Sanders was in there, Keontae Robinson. They just have so many playmakers at the running back position, and it's just honestly unreal considering they just won a national championship. Bryce Young, he's the quarterback coming out of Mater Dei High School. He's a sophomore. He's in the same boat as DJ Uiagalelei, the Clemson quarterback. They're both younger players coming in to be the starter this upcoming season. They've got to somehow lead their team to have a good year, which those teams are used to having great years, making the playoff every year, and really it's the test of whether they'll do it or not. And Bryce Young showed great mobility early on, and Nick Saban had mentioned during the game that he had wished that Bryce Young had gotten some more playing time during the 2020 season, which it was a lot tougher for that to happen considering they were playing a full SEC schedule, but they were blowing teams out left and right. He just didn't get as much playing time as he wished, but I think that the spring ball, he has been very impressive from what I've heard, and sometimes I just think he tries to do too much. He did accidentally he did have a fumble that was fumbled in the end zone and picked up for a touchdown, so He's just got to be able to take a sack at sometimes. I don't think it's much that big of a deal. It's just part of being a young quarterback and the Southeastern Conference going against the defense, who is all very, very experienced, and they're returning a lot of the guys on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that they just have to finish drives on offense. They weren't finishing very well on offense. They were getting down there, and they missed quite a bit of field goals, which has been kind of a thing for Alabama in recent history. But really, I think that if they can finish the drives and get points on the board, and Bryce Young can learn to fight for another play and take a sack sometimes, I think that Bryce Young will do great. His final stats were 25 of 44, 331 yards, or excuse me, 333 yards and one touchdown. And so, very good game for him. A lot of passing. I don't think we'll see that much passing from Alabama this upcoming season. I just think that it's nice to be able to see Bryce Young in action, throwing the ball a lot more than he normally would, and get him out of his comfort zone of throwing that much. Because in high school, he was playing with Mater Dei, one of the greatest high school teams there is in the country, and he has a lot of guys he can just pass the ball to, and they'll go run it 99 yards down the field without anyone catching him. He had a lot of playmakers at Mater Dei, and he has very similar playmakers at Alabama, and probably even better receivers in college with him. And the final score of the game was 13-10. The offensive team did win, and so it was a close game at the end. And Agiye Hall, a freshman wide receiver, early enrollee, had 4 receptions, 72 yards. He was a standout playmaker. Had some great catches, man. He wants to start this year, and it's gonna be tough with that depth at receiver. Javonte Baker, Trayshawn Holden, all those guys are returning. Slade Bolden as well, who's a part of the team, a big part of the team for the national championship season. But Agiye Hall really made a name for himself out there and played great with some huge catches, some great catches. And so great. The future looks pretty bright for the Alabama team. They are set to face off versus Miami in the opening game of the 2021 college football season. That's going to be a great game. Next week we may be doing coverage on the Miami Hurricanes spring game, and that game was just this weekend as well, so we'll update you guys whether we are going to be covering that game or not. We're moving on to the Georgia spring game. The Georgia team has a very good depth at running back, just like Alabama, and I think that it's really impressive. Kirby Smart Georgia's had a history of bringing good running backs in and out of their program, and they're really keeping that up. James Cook, brother of Dalvin Cook. James Cook was the starter for the Georgia Bulldogs this past year and had a great season. Kendall Milton, a sophomore. Zamir White, the junior. They're all different types of running backs. They're just so good. Sevion Clark, and they've got some good freshmen. And all those guys are so experienced, and I think that it'll be nice to teach some of the younger guys. Most of the guys are sophomores. There's only one freshman running back right now for Georgia, but I think that those guys are going to be key for helping those freshmen develop and become better players. But the depth for Georgia, obviously JT Daniels came in the middle of the season for Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett could easily be the second string quarterback for Georgia, but there's like 3 guys who are fighting for that second string spot at the quarterback depth chart, and I think that it's going to be close to whoever it is. Obviously JT Daniels is a starter, and it's going to be interesting to see who's behind him, because they have 3 guys who could really play. Stetson Bennett played 4 games last year, and then JT Daniels came in. They went undefeated with JT Daniels, but Stetson Bennett obviously still has experience, unlike some other guys. But Carson Beck, the freshman, he didn't play the best that he could have in their game. But they also have Brock Vandergriff, who was a freshman coming out of high school, and he is a stud. He played so good in the game, and it's just insane. And he's a really good player. He honestly looked like the starter out there. He was in control. He could run the ball. He could throw the ball on the run. He had a great day and put on a really good show for the Georgia Bulldogs team. And they have a very strong defensive line, and which will be interesting to see how they play out and how it will help their team. But their offensive line played really poorly in the first quarter, giving up 3 sacks, and then only gave up 1 in the throughout the rest of the game in 3 quarters. So very good improvement from the first to fourth quarter, only giving up 1 in 3 quarters, but gave up 3 in the first quarter, and they ended up turning it around. Very good. JT Daniels, my thoughts on his performance. He had some good reads. He was a little too strong on his throws in the first half, but in the second half he was extremely accurate. He went 28 of 41, 324 yards and 3 touchdowns. So they let him sling it too, just like Bryce Young was able to sling it in the Alabama 8A game, and he played great. And it's gonna be exciting to see what he can do. At first, it really just seemed like he has a lot of high expectations. He's got Heisman floating around. He's in the Heisman conversation. Davey O'Brien, obviously, and I think that the expectations looked to be a little large in the first half for him. He kind of expected to go out there and put up 200 yards in the first half throwing and 2+ touchdowns, but he calmed down after halftime and came out and put on a good show, very accurate, and the receivers were really dropping a lot of their passes. And I bet you about 5 of those incompletions from Bryce Young were due to his receivers dropping the ball. There's not very good depth at receiver with James Pickens and Trey Burton out. It's just really unfortunate that that had to happen to those guys. But Brock Griff was a third string freshman quarterback right now. He looked like the starting quarterback, as I mentioned. He was playing very good. He did unfortunately fumble the ball, but other than that, I mean, you can expect that from a freshman in a spring game. But he looked very strong all throughout the game, and I noticed a lot of their passing game attack was a lot of passes to the running backs out of the backfield. So we'll see if Georgia really utilizes their running back core out of the backfield this upcoming season. Carson Beck, as I mentioned, he was extremely inaccurate, and there was about one play where he threw a 20-yard pass he threw a pass 20 yards over his receiver right to the defender. He just looked really bad, and I would expect for him to not be the second string quarterback. It's either going to be Stetson Bennett or Brock Vandagriff, because they both had decent games, and they really have no depth as a receiver, as I just mentioned. It's going to be hard for whoever is a starting quarterback. The final score was 28-23. The offensive team did win. That is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you guys have not already, please leave a like down below and subscribe. Thank you.